Shadow of the Tomb Raider is a 2018 action-adventure video game developed by Eidos Montreal and published by Square Enix's European subsidiary. It continues the narrative from the 2015 game The Rise of the Tomb Raider and is the 12th mainline entry in the Tomb Raider series, as well as the third and final entry in the Survivor trilogy. The game was originally released worldwide for Microsoft Windows, PlayStation 4 and Xbox One. Versions for Mac OS, Linux and Stadia were released in November 2019. After the release, the game was expanded upon with downloadable content in both Season Pass and as a standalone releases. Set roughly a year after the events of The Rise of the Tomb Raider, its story follows Lara Croft as she ventures through the tropical regions of the Americas to the legendary city of Paititi, battling the paramilitary organization Trinity and racing to stop the Mayan apocalypse she has unleashed. Lara must traverse the environment and combat enemies with firearms and stealth as she explores semi-open hubs. In these hubs, she can raid, challenge tombs and unlock new rewards, complete side missions and scavenge for resources which can be used to craft useful materials. Development began in 2015 following the completion of The Rise of the Tomb Raider, lasting until July of 2018. Shadow of the Tomb Raider was designated to conclude Lara's journey that began in the 2013 reboot, with a key theme being descent, both through the jungle environment and into her own personality. The setting and the narrative were based on the Mayan and Aztec mythologies, with the team consulting historians to create the architecture and the people of Paititi. The gameplay was adjusted based on both fan feedback and the wishes of Eidos Montreal, incorporating swimming and grappling while increasing difficulty tailoring. Camille Ludington returns to provide the voice and motion capture work for Lara. The game cost an estimated $110 to $135 million to develop, making it one of the most expensive games ever made. Released as the final installment in Lara Croft's original trilogy, Shadow of the Tomb Raider received generally positive reviews from critics, with particular praise going to the game's emphasis on challenging tombs and puzzles, although some felt the series' gameplay had become stale and lacked innovation. While opening to slow sales, the game eventually shipped over 8.9 million copies worldwide. Now, when I began looking for a new game to play, I came across this title. I'd never been a huge fan of the Lara Croft Tomb Raider series, but when I'd seen some of the trailers, I figured why not give this one a go. I've always loved the adventure style of games, particularly, of course, the Uncharted series, so for me this was a way to play Uncharted without actually playing the game, if that makes sense. Now, of course, I've enjoyed the graphics, the platforming, and the challenging tombs, and Lara Croft is a great character to play with, but this is no Uncharted, to say the least, and for me, this is its poorer cousin, as it were. Maybe it's not fair to compare the two games, but naturally you're going to, as they are both cast in the sort of similar genre and game style. Now, to be fair, I haven't played the full trilogy, but when looking at all three games, I felt this was one of the perfect ones to start with, albeit the last in the series. For some reason, this one just grabbed me more than the other two, and I'm quite glad I actually did decide to play this one, as it is a fascinating story as you travel throughout Mexico and encounter the Inca and of course the legendary city of Paititi. With a story that manages to satisfactorily tread the line between high-concept fun and grounded character exploration, I enjoyed the various game's numerous challenges, tombs and puzzles, as well as the fight sequences, which were rather challenging and quite exciting. One thing that made the game more authentic for me was the option to let the locals in Paititi speak in their own language, which I thought was a nice touch, as well as the attention to detail in how the representation of Paititi as well as its inhabitants was presented. However, though, the one trouble I did have with the game is that in the game Lara only speaks English, and somehow every character seems to understand Lara, and Lara seems to understand every language. It leads to bizarre scenes in which Lara is masquerading as a local, gives a password to a tombs guard in English. In saying that, though, the story is good, and the main antagonist here, Amaru, is good without evolving too much. I did enjoy the storyline involving Inuratu. She is an interesting character, and her story arc did make me sad, as you became really invested in her. Also, the Axial, the strange humanoid monsters, were I found rather unnerving, as they act as the guardians of the famous box, and crawl and attack you directly, and their scenes always led to make me feel quite uneasy. Their leader, of course, the Crimson Fire, is a beautifully designed and fascinating character, and I just couldn't take my eyes off of her. The gameplay is good, and the story and the graphics, and everything hits out in the right mark. It's just that you can't help but compare it to the Uncharted series, and for me, this is just not on that level. This is not a game that would make me now want to go and play the trilogy, or a game that I'd necessarily need to play over again. And even though it does everything particularly right, it just lacks that je ne sais quoi that makes other games stand out. Shadow of the Tomb Raider gets a 7.5 out of 10.